My name is Becca Kraft. I'm the Director of Product Marketing for Desk.com. Thank you for joining this webinar. Today we're going to talk about how to go global as a small business with customer service. Because the world is getting smaller than ever before, and as small businesses, we need to take advantage of that big, big world. So one of the things that I want to encourage you to do as part of this webinar is to join the conversation. This is intended to be an interactive experience, so I encourage you to connect with us. We have a fabulous guest speaker from a company called Udemy today, so I encourage you to tweet at us. We've got a couple of Twitter handles for you to take advantage of, at Udemy and at Desk. And if you want to use the hashtag #CustServeWins, that's a great way to interact. I also want to give you a heads up that we'll be doing Q&A at the end of this webinar. So if along the way you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat box as part of the webinar. And potentially what we'll be able to do is towards the end possibly unmute some folks, but that really depends on my level of technical expertise with GoToWebinar, so I'm going to apologize in advance. Lastly, you'll be able to get this webinar on demand. So if for some reason you have to leave the webinar a bit early, we'll be sending everyone a recording. So with that, I'd like to start, get started. So before we go any further, I just want to talk a little bit about our safe harbor statement. Salesforce is a publicly traded company, and so when we start talking about our product, we sometimes get really excited about some of the things that it can do and the ways that it's going to evolve. I encourage you to make your purchase decisions based on currently available products and publicly available information, and that is all I'm going to say about our safe harbor slide. If you'd like to read it in its entirety, you can find it on our website. So in today's agenda, I was feeling a little bit Disney when I was taking a look at this agenda for the webinar, but it really is a small world after all. And we're going to unpack a little bit about the implications of globalization and localization, especially as it relates to small businesses. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about customer service from small businesses in a big world. You know, it's a small world after all, but it's still big, big, big. So how do you as a small business reach that huge audience? Now, we're going to ask my friend from Udemy to talk a little bit about how they met the challenge and went global with customer service and include some best practices and key lessons learned. And then we'll get into the Q&A. So today, our customer service expert, or our really big customer service expert, is a gentleman named Alex Mozes, my good friend Alex. He's the Director of Customer Support at Udemy, and you can also tweet directly at him. I'm sure he'd love to hear from you. And of course, I'm Becca Kraft, the Director of Product Marketing for Desk.com. Alex, do you want to say a quick hello? Are you on the line?
Yes, I am. Hello to everybody. Thank you so much for the intro, Becca. We are very good friends, and I'm very excited to be here with everybody. Looking forward to this conversation.
Thanks, Alex. So the big question that a lot of people have is, how did the world get so big and so small at the same time? And this is really all about the internet. And does anyone on the line know who this gentleman is? Anyone? No? That is not Steve Jobs, although that's a very good guess. That is Tim Berners-Lee, often credited for inventing the internet. What he really did was he thought about the notion of what would happen if I connect everybody to, or if I connect all the data in the internet, or if I connect all the pieces of information that are out there using a hypertext protocol, right, HTTP. And with that explosion, keep in mind, Tim Berners-Lee, he was in the UK, and the company that he was working for was based in California. So when you think about the first users of the internet, they were primarily English speakers. And that continued for a long time. Into the 1990s, internet users were more than 80% native English speakers. But it only took about a decade for that number to plummet. At the end of the 2000s, only 27% of the internet users in the world were native English speakers. Now, that seems like a dramatic shift, but if you think about it, the internet population from the end of the 2000s, or the aughts, as we like to call them, into the beginning of the 2010s, you saw a doubling of the number of internet users in the world. But the places that were driving that increase were in places like Europe Asia, the Middle East, Africa, Latin America, places where you have certainly way, way more than English being spoken. And so if you consider how that trend is probably going to continue, the penetration of internet users in English-speaking countries is quite dramatic, whereas other countries have a lot more growth. And the key thing to remember about this globalized world is that global consumers still prefer a really localized experience. If you think about just some of these statistics and the implications for your business, if 72.4% of global consumers prefer to use their native language shopping online, and you as a company aren't able to provide them with any information, they will likely go to one of your competitors. And even more interesting is that 55% of global consumers only buy products from sites providing information in their own language, which means that if you want to gain that business more internationally and more globally, it's incumbent on you to start recognizing, hey, where are the places in the world that are interested in my product, so that you can start providing information in that language so that you can grow that market for yourself. When you start thinking about preferences, when global consumers prefer getting information in their language and recognize that to them that is more important than price, you can see that this global customer experience is really driven by a localized experience. So one of the things that we talk a lot about here at Desk.com is how we can help with that. And Desk.com is really focused on taking small business global with multilingual support. We do that in a variety of ways. We're very, very focused on improving customer satisfaction. And that means that we provide multilingual options in self-service support sites. So if you're thinking about self-service and you're thinking about how you can help customers help themselves, it's easy for you to create a version of your self-service support site in a localized language. You can include all of those knowledge articles in the different languages side by side. So it's very easy to edit and adjust as your knowledge gets better and better. In addition, we want to help all of our small businesses increase agent productivity. You know, time is money. So one of the things that we try to do is we try to give you options in terms of creating language detecting rules and different workflows so that you can manage cases coming in from different languages much more efficiently. And finally, we want to enable small businesses to manage global support, which means we want to empower agents to use Desk.com in their preferred language, provide a lot of our productivity tools in a preferred language. So if you're using, for example, macros, and Alex, I know you love macros, in the preferred language of an agent, then that's something that Desk.com enables you to do. So I want to turn it over really to Alex, who's been through this process and is currently in this process, as I understand it. Alex, why don't you get started by telling us a little bit about Udemy and your role there?
Absolutely. So for folks that aren't familiar, Udemy is an online education marketplace with a mission to help anyone learn anything. So what that means is we have created a platform that allows anybody to create and host online courses on whatever subject they like, many skills-based courses, a lot of technology and business development training courses. And then anybody can then take those courses from around the world. My role at Udemy is as the director of the support team, and I've been there now for a little over 3 years, so there are many hats before this one. But one of the big areas that we have focused on is an organic growth into the international market for education. And I think it was a natural evolution from a mission like help anyone learn anything. That does mean anywhere as well. And I'm really excited to kind of walk through some of the things that we saw, some of the lessons that we learned in that process as we started to try to help anybody around the world use Udemy.
It's really exciting to see the growth of your company because, you know, as I understand it, Udemy is really a global platform. But in the way that you and I have talked about customer service, I understand you haven't necessarily been actively pursuing a global customer base just from the start. Can you tell us a little bit about how that evolved?
Certainly, and I think this is going to be true for most small businesses, is you don't necessarily just choose one day to become an international company. It almost starts to happen to you first. So for us, and I think this is going to be true for a lot of folks that are dealing with online companies, when we started noticing customers from other countries, we started realizing or focusing on the potential in those countries. So my support team would receive emails in various languages that we would Google Translate to try to respond to, and we're also then able to start seeing some of the trends in which countries we're sending those messages. So very early on, support was critically involved in determining that international strategy, basically being able to react to the information that we were able to see in Desk. If you think about the support team being the bleeding edge of your company, they're the ones that hear about the problems first and see and can deduce the trends of customers in an especially unique way that carries over to internationalization as well.
So folks on the phone, I'd be very interested to understand, how many of you are support managers and have experienced this sort of bleeding edge of your company kind of experience. If you just want to raise your hand in the GoToWebinar, then it'll give us a sense of how many of you can really relate to the kinds of things that Alex is talking about. And I understand that one of the things that Alex, you were seeing was a correlation of volume in particular international regions.
That's right, exactly. So we were able to see very clearly when regions started to grow. So, for example, we could see that in Brazil we started to get a growth in traffic, and that sort of allowed us to know when we needed to start having a more focused strategy. So to give you an example, and I think Brazil is really a perfect one for the first foray into a global company, is when a company in Brazil posted a course, organically found Udemy, began using the site in a way that we had not necessarily intended or prepared for. The site was not in Portuguese. There were not resources in Portuguese, but a company that was an early adopter saw potential and began using the site, and that in turn led us to see customers contacting us in Portuguese.
That's so cool. So once you started finding all these different areas, then what?
Well, one of the things I think is really important to recognize about the internationalization strategies is those first customers that you get, they are usually the English-speaking customers in a particular region, but they aren't necessarily the representation of that region. So one of the things that we did was start to think about, well, if we are having a series of people coming through trying to access our mostly English content, they may be able to speak English to some extent, but we want to make sure that they have that local experience. And we heard from a lot of startups that we began to talk to, a lot of established companies that had been in regions around the world, that it's important to create not just a translated experience, but a localized experience. And that meant that we had to make sure that the translations that we did to all of our content, both to the website and to the knowledge base and to all of the responses that we would send to customers, that all of those didn't just sound like a Google translated version of what I was saying in English, but rather actually sounded like it was from from the native tongue. So some perfect examples of that are the colloquialisms that we use in support. Saying, "I'll get right back to you," doesn't necessarily translate well in all languages. The word, we had some challenges with mistranslated words where they were the right translation but just the wrong context, right? So if you think about, for example, the challenge of trying to I'm trying to think of a good example that we had recently. Do you remember what it was, Becca? I know I mentioned it to you.
I think there was something you said about the save story.
Yes, exactly. Save is exactly the challenge that we had. We found that if we just tried to do that bare minimum translation of the content and not focus on the localization where we actually try to make it a native, not just a translated experience, we had situations like the save term being used to save someone from drowning rather than save a file. And it's just too easy to see through the bare thread of that kind of an attempt to actually be able to make an impact in another place. And it really, I think, for us, it really opened up challengers. And in fact, we would see in Brazil, once we started establishing that marketplace but not doing an excellent job of it, we saw copycats and other companies start to steal market share who were localized and felt like a site built for Brazil. And that, I think, was a really interesting learning that we were able to bring to many of the other work that we've done.
Well, so did you go out and learn Portuguese?
Unfortunately, that I don't think would work for me. I took 7 years of Spanish, and I still can barely speak it. So I don't think I'd be ready to learn Portuguese. But we did have to figure out a way to translate the site. So we went through a lot of iterations and made a lot of mistakes along the way to try to localize our content. We started by trying individual people that we would find on Craigslist to come into the office, and we quickly found that the management of that was not ideal, and the variance that we would see from one translation to another was really terrible. We started trying to work with independent translation management companies that had sort of a smaller group to manage their translation, and we worked with a couple of specific companies that we had kind of found as the value-based option. And all of them we would get a lot of translated text that cost a lot of money, but then when we would talk to a native speaker, so for example, once we started looking at Spain and some of the Spanish-speaking countries, we had a native Spanish speaker who would focus on that region. She would look at the translations and say, "This is just not good." So probably about 5 or 6 months ago, we transitioned to working with Verbalize It, and I think one of the things that's made a huge difference with them is we focus specifically on two things. One is thinking not just about the translation of the text, but the style that the text is written in. So, for example, the big reason the big region that Udemy has just launched in was Japan. We've partnered with a large company there, have launched the partnership at the beginning of this month, and are in fact going live next week. When you're launching in a place like Japan, it's important to realize that the way that your website may be written in English does not work in Japan. Not just the text, but the tone may be very off. We have our brand values here at Udemy really focus on optimism and a friendly, supportive tone. And it's quickly recognized that there needs to be a much more professional element. So with Verbalize It, we actually built a style guide for all of their translation team, and they are able to basically source translators and retain them in a much more high-touch way, so that those translators are actually able to stay in tune with our team needs. So that style guide was really critical. And the other piece that's actually made a huge difference is a smart learning engine for how they handle the glossary of terms that are unique to our company, and how they continue to improve based on corrections that we make. So one of the things that we saw with a lot of other companies was we would see errors, we would tell them to fix those errors, how this translation should work. Save is a good example, right? and it would get fixed in one place but not in another, or it would happen again down the road. So the way that Verbalize was actually able to become a smart learning engine for that process has made a big difference, I think, in our ability to do a lot of translations. And in fact, I think one of the first pieces that we had to translate here was the knowledge base. Through Desk. So the fact that Desk allowed us to support multilingual capabilities is, in fact, one of the primary reasons we transitioned to Desk about a year and a half ago, because we saw the writing on the wall, knew we would need to have at least a Spanish version of the knowledge base, and being able to have a single article that appears in different languages based on the user, rather than having different sites or different sections of the same site, was a really powerful capability.
Well, and Alex, you and I have talked about how important it is to find local knowledgeable partners in terms of your growth, and you had some great statistics about when you got to about a quarter of a one-agent volume, it was time to hire an agent. Talk a little bit more about that.
Certainly, yeah. So the growth was very, we had to be very careful about it. I mean, I think a mistake that a lot of companies make when they're trying to grow into a region is to go heavy and put all your chips on the table. I'm going to hire the support team that's ready to handle it. I'm going to hire a country manager. I'm going to have a marketing director, and I'm going to basically build a local team before the local region is established. And I think it's important, and we've had this experience of targeting countries that turn out not to be the right target. And I think that recognizing that you really only know whether the customers in a particular location are valuable when they prove themselves to be interested in your product. So we certainly wanted to make sure that we were not overcommitting to a location before it had grown to a specific point. And one of the ways that we could measure that very directly is the number of support tickets we would get in a particular language. So initially, for most of the places that we expanded to, we didn't have anybody on the support team to provide language support in the local language, which meant Google Translate, which was certainly not the ideal. And we saw our customer satisfaction in those regions suffer to some extent as a result of that. However, I do think that when you're talking about those early adopters, there's quite a bit of forgiveness in terms of the early experiences in a particular language. Those folks that are using the site as some of the first people from a particular country are willing to have a slightly worse experience because they're that much more interested in your product as the early adopters. But what we would do is watch for those numbers to get to about a quarter to a half of an agent. And that's when we knew that, A, we were starting to really see some traction, and obviously we could see that in a lot of our other metrics, but we knew that now we also needed that full-time support to get the localized language. So we would target between a quarter and a half of an agent's full-time day. Once we saw that many tickets coming through in a particular language, we would bring on a native speaker for the support team. And that way we could not only cover that language, but also add a little extra capacity to help with the rest of the team, because they could spend usually the first 6 months or so not only having all of the tickets in their particular language routed to them, but also being able to answer English tickets as well.
Well, and that segues really nicely into the point that you've made to me time and again, which is that localization doesn't just matter to customers, it really matters to your agents. Surprise!
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's true. Yeah.
Talk a little bit about what you've done with that.
Absolutely. So this really happened in the last 3 or 4 months. I mentioned the Japanese partnership, and this is one that takes a little bit of a different approach than we did in Brazil, for example. Japan happened with that model that I mentioned earlier, where we're committed, and really this happened because we partnered with a large company there who's going to be the front runner for a lot of this product. But it did mean that we needed to spin up local people, and in fact, not just native speakers, but local to Japan. We're going to have a team there helping with some of the support that we anticipate starting in like 4 days. So we're about to go and we're about to see what it's like. But in the run-up to that, over the last 6 weeks, to make sure that the team in Japan has the ideal experience, we wanted to make sure that the tool was seamless for them, recognizing that it really doesn't do much good to try to become an efficient and happy customer support team member when you don't understand the tool that you're looking at. So Desk, I think, aligned perfectly with the timing for us, and we're able to, we're in the new next-gen agent tool, provide a natively translated version of the tool itself. So now the update and resolve button is in Japanese, and the fields about email address and info links, etc., are now in that agent's local language.
Yeah,
the other piece,
the localized agent console has been really, really valuable for our companies, our small businesses that are taking their customer service more global, because when they hire that agent being able to read and interact with Desk.com in their own language has been really valuable.
Yes, it's very true. And I think that for folks in English-speaking countries, we've seen some really powerful capabilities in Desk. And you mentioned it before. My favorite is macros. I am a huge proponent of using those macros effectively. It allows us to make sure we're providing the best possible response to the vast majority of questions.
Well, for those on the phone, a macro is the ability to perform multiple actions with one click. And those macros are channel specific, so you can use the same macro across Twitter, across Facebook, within your email, but you can also use them in other languages. So from a multilingual perspective, they're really, really valuable. And I think the other one, Alex, that you mentioned was the knowledge base.
That's right. Well, so the knowledge base is very straightforward and easy to manage for multiple languages, especially with our partnership with Verbalize It. They are directly integrated with Desk through an API that allows them to do a lot more with their language recognition software. I'm sorry, it's the pattern recognition of various phrases to be able to actually get better translations for less cost on that support center, which is, frankly, a larger volume of text than the website itself, right? When you think about where is most of your text, it's in your knowledge base. So being able to have a company that really does a good job in there is key. I do want to bring up one other key piece here, though, for localization. You mentioned the macros being available in multiple languages. That is true to some extent in that you can make macros in a specific language. So, for example, I can have Japanese macros that are only used in Japan. But in that model, you end up duplicating your macro library if you wanted to do all of the macros that you would experience in English. However, the liquid variable tool that Desk has opened this door and allowed us to solve this problem. So for folks that aren't familiar, Desk has an entire library and the ability for you to create, in essence, a variable value that you can plug in into anything else on Desk. For example, into a macro, into an email, into the support center. We are using liquid variables to be able to display specific phrases on the support center site. And you can create your own, and those are language aware. So because Desk is able to identify the language of a user as they come into the support center, and we're doing this currently through an SSO when they access the support center through the site or through their IP address, I believe. It's actually probably through their website settings. But anyway, when they come in, we're now able to know what that language that person is speaking and automatically provide the response in their language and still take advantage of all of the speed and efficiency tools in Desk rather than having to force non-native speakers to take a less efficient approach. So I think we're seeing our Japanese agents through the trainings recently really appreciate the fact that they're getting a localized experience.
Well, I want to turn it over to Q&A and get some of the questions that we've been getting in our chat. People, keep them coming. These questions are fantastic. But one of the ones I want to start with is a little bit more general, Alex, if you don't mind, is what do you wish you knew at the beginning of the process that you know now? What's the advice that you could give?
Okay. I think one of the first things that I wish I knew then that I know now is that when it comes to translation, the cheapest option is not the best approach. There are ways to do translation at 5 to 7 cents a word. Google Translate or some other companies can do it at a couple of cents a word. But there's a point at which you are just doing work that you're going to have to do over again, and that's what happened to us. So I think that if I had known about Verbalize It and recognizing that they are not the cheapest option, but they are going to let me do this once rather than have to do it. I've now translated the Udemy website 3 different times to get the level of quality that we're looking for. So that's certainly something I wish I'd known early. I think that the other thing that I would add to that I wish I'd known when we first started this process is I wish I had known a little bit more about the importance of, or I should say the difference between localization and translation from an experiential perspective. In other words, I think that before I started this process, I sort of understood the idea that a particular region had a particular style and that we couldn't simply translate our English, but it really started to drive home some of the places that we had not done a good job of providing good glossaries and working with a good company that could not just translate our text but localize it so that it was a local experience. I keep coming back to these colloquialisms, and I think it's going to depend a lot on your site, but if you read through some of your articles or you start poking around your site and you start seeing phrases that maybe don't make sense to somebody that's not a native English speaker, that means they're probably not going to make sense translated either.
So this is a great answer, Alex. And we had a couple of questions come through from users of Desk.com who are not necessarily the most tech savvy. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about maybe your top 2 or 3 features that have been most useful to you in going global with customer service.
Okay. No, I would say number 1 is the knowledge base tool. So, and you're talking specifically about Desk, so the tools within Desk that have helped us from the support side to go global. Right? Yeah. Yeah. So the capability in Desk to manage the knowledge base in multiple languages was huge and fundamental. So before we used Desk, we used a site called User Voice. And I think User Voice probably falls with a similar model to some other support center management sites, where it's basically a page of articles or links to other pages, kind of like a WordPress site, where on the management tool, I have a library of those documents, and I can edit those documents. But Desk has put an extra layer on top of those documents, so that when I look at my library of all the various articles that I may have, I can simply turn on a translation capability, and it'll show me versions of that article in the different languages. And what's really cool is my ability to actually set it so that when an article gets updated, so something changes and we update that article in English, all of the other languages are marked as drafts so that now Verbalize It can very easily, with minimal management process, can see when there needs to be updates and fix those articles in the various languages. So that's actually really powerful. And then I've said it before and I'll say it again, macros make the world go round. I mean, macros are a really cool tool. And from the ability for me to quickly answer questions in a very personalized way, I know that I think a lot of folks, when they think about macros, they consider them to be the impersonal robot speak of support. And I would contest that position when you consider how you can use macros in combination with liquid variables to get a custom response and to be able to have a library of hundreds of macros that are catered to specific scenarios. That's really where I think they become especially powerful. I'll give you a perfect example. My manager actually just forwarded me a support ticket, a support response he got from Uber. I think many folks here are familiar with Uber, the ride-sharing service. He sent a 3-star review about Uber and said that there was an odor in the car, and within minutes received a very specialized "we're sorry" smell in your car message. It wasn't just the standard "we're sorry about your experience." It was customized to him, but certainly done in an automated fashion. So to get back to how this matters when it comes to localization, that kind of efficiency makes all the difference when you're building your support team. We really don't just focus on quality of response, but also capacity, and being able to use a tool like macros in whatever language you're expanding to, I think, is a critical tool.
Well, I want to be sensitive to folks' time. I know we've been on this webinar for almost 40 minutes now. So I want to thank you for joining, and I want to remind you that if you haven't already downloaded a free trial of Desk.com, you can do that now. Actually, it's not a download, it's just a login. But it means that you too can start providing amazing customer service if you haven't already. You can help customers help themselves in any language. You can give agents the tools they need to work fast all over the world. And you can grow your business internationally with better support insights. Thank you all so much for joining the webinar. We